Vexthor had dealt with defiant species before. The Cather spat concentrated acid when cornered. The Threndel could scream in frequencies that shattered glass and disrupted neural processing. The Malvarian simply exploded when sufficiently agitated, which was, as a tactical problem, at least straightforward to categorize. But humans did something far more unsettling than any of these things. They acted as though the entire situation were a mild inconvenience at best, and they did it with weaponized pleasantness that his training manual had never once addressed. Captain Rodriguez to cargo bay. Maya said into her wristcom, still holding that metal object with the easy possession of someone who has never in their life considered putting down their favorite tool. We've got visitors. The bossy kind. Vexthor's translator offered 3 competing interpretations of the word bossy before settling on commanding, which seemed approximately correct while missing something essential about the tone. He gestured to Thrax, who immediately moved to secure the entrance. The remaining soldiers fanned out with practiced efficiency, their plasma rifles covering every shadow, every junction, every potential vector threat. The scanners, meanwhile, continued their maddening, unshakable insistence that there were no threats present. Footsteps in the corridor beyond, unhurried, unworried, the footsteps of people walking towards something rather than away from it, and 2 more humans entered the cargo bay. The first was an older male, somewhere around 50 cycles if Vex's age estimation protocols could be trusted. He wore a captain's jacket that had survived enough years to develop genuine character, not worn out, but worn in the way things look when they've been somewhere real. His face carried a particular quality of weathering that came from decades in deep space, not age so much as seasoned, like metal that has been through fire and come out denser for the experience. Behind him was a shorter male, young, dark-haired, with engine grease embedded under his fingernails in a way that suggested it had become a permanent feature of his hands rather than an accidental one. "Commander!" The captain extended the word with a slight nod that occupied the ambiguous space between respect and irony. With humans, Vexthor was beginning to understand, these 2 things were not mutually exclusive. "Welcome aboard. Coffee." "I do not require your coffee," Vexthor replied, his mandibles clicking with the precision of someone who is maintaining their composure through professional discipline. "I require your cooperation. This vessel was scheduled to dock at station Kepler 73 cycles ago. You are off course behind schedule, and your cargo manifest has more holes in it than a Vexian cheese wheel." The younger human, his name patch Redkim, produced a sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Did he just make a cheese joke? "I believe he did," Maya confirmed, tossing a metal cylinder from one hand to the other with the practiced, unconscious ease of someone who has done this motion 10,000 times while thinking about something else entirely. The arc was smooth and precise. Every rifle barrel in the room tracked it. Points for cultural references. Kim shook his head with what looked remarkably like genuine admiration. Didn't think Cauldrath had a sense of humor. "We do not," Vexthor said flatly. All 3 humans smiled at exactly the same moment. He had no idea why, and the not knowing unsettled him in ways he found difficult to articulate even to himself. "Your cargo," Vexthor pressed, returning himself firmly to the matter at hand. "Explain the manifest discrepancies." "Captain Rodriguez." He had introduced himself without waiting to be asked, another distinctly human habit that Vexthor was cataloguing with increasing frequency, pulled a data pad from his jacket pocket, tapped it twice with the unhurried confidence of a man who knows his paperwork is in order, and held it out. "Discrepancies is a strong word. We made an unscheduled stop at the Tyrell mining colony. They were running critically low on medical supplies. We had medical supplies. It seemed like the obvious thing to do. You altered your flight plan," Vexthor said slowly, making sure his translator was conveying the full weight of his bewilderment, "for emotional reasons, for people who needed help." "Yeah." Kim had moved to lean against a cargo crate with his arms crossed, and the expression of someone who is entirely comfortable with where he is and what he's done. "You got a problem with that." Vexthor's tactical training had prepared him for hostility. It had prepared him for violence, for desperate escape attempts, for the particular frenetic energy of beings who had nothing left to lose. It had not, in any module, any simulation, any intelligence briefing he had ever attended, prepared him for casual moral certainty delivered with easy smiles by people who were in no way intimidated by 12 plasma rifles. His confusion must have registered on his face, Because Maya laughed, a genuine sound that bounced off the metal walls with cheerful, uncontained life. "Look," she said, stepping forward. 2 rifles tracked her immediately. She gave no indication of noticing. "Here's the situation, Commander. We're a cargo hauler. We haul cargo. Sometimes we haul it where it actually needs to go instead of where the paperwork says it should go. If that makes us criminals, fine. Guilty as charged." She twirled the metal cylinder in her fingers, a complex, fluid motion that spoke of years of habitual practice, the kind of skill that lives in the hands rather than the mind. The object spun, caught the light, and settled back into her palm with a solid, satisfying thump. "What?" Vexthor said, with the measured patience of someone who has asked this question twice already and is committing to asking it as many more times as necessary. "Is that object?" Maya held it up, examining it as though giving the question genuine consideration for the first time. "This is a torque wrench, 24 millimeter. She said it with the quiet warmth of someone introducing an old, trusted companion. "Best tool in my kit." "A tool?" "Yep. Used it this morning to fix the coolant regulator. Probably use it this afternoon to calibrate the thrust vectoring. It keeps busy." Vexthor's scanner confirmed this with the weary thoroughness of a system that has run the same check 4 times and keeps arriving at the same underwhelming answer. No energy signature. No combat programming. Just a primitive mechanical instrument that belonged in a technological museum rather than on a functioning starship. And yet something in his tactical subroutine continued to fire. Not an alarm, not a classified threat designation, but something softer and more difficult to name. Something that was the way Maya Torres held that wrench, the way her fingers fell naturally to the precise points of grip without looking, the way her body carried a quiet, grounded confidence that had nothing to prove and nothing to fear, and refused to be entirely at ease. "Before we go poking through crates," Maya said, stepping directly into his path with the easy confidence of someone who genuinely has not learned how to be intimidated, "how about I show you what this thing actually does? Since you seem so interested." "That will not be necessary." "I insist." She was already moving toward an access panel on the wall, the wrench loose in her right hand. "Here's the thing about military types. Commander, you see everything as a potential threat. That's your job. I respect it. But sometimes a tool is just a tool, and sometimes understanding that matters more than you'd think." She popped open the access panel to reveal a tangle of pipes, connectors, and wiring that made Vexthor's engineering sensibilities recoil in quiet horror. Half those connections appeared to violate basic thermodynamics. The fact that this vessel was flying was, on some fundamental level, a sustained argument against the universe's normal operating principles. "This coupling here," Maya said, pointing to a hexagonal bolt where 2 pressurized pipes met, "has been vibrating loose for about 3 weeks. Every time we hit jump speed, the thermal expansion shifts it just enough to let microfractures form in the seal." She positioned the wrench socket around the bolt with the precision of someone who has done this exact motion hundreds of times, in exactly this way, and found it exactly right every time. One smooth, practiced turn clockwise. A small adjustment to something on the handle. Vexthor caught the faint clicking of internal calibration mechanisms engaging. A final quarter turn. She straightened up and closed the panel with a solid, definitive click. "Torque to exactly 90 Newton meters," she said, with a quiet professional satisfaction that felt entirely genuine and entirely owned. "Not 91, not 89, 90, because too tight and the pipe cracks under thermal load. Too loose and we get coolant leaking into the atmospheric processes, which, trust me on this, makes the whole ship smell considerably worse than it already does." Vexthor stared at the closed panel for a moment. "You tightened the bolt." Maya's expression carried the particular, patient quality of a master craftsperson who has heard this precise mischaracterization before and has made peace with the fact that they will hear it again. "I precisely calibrated a critical junction in our life support infrastructure. But sure, let's go with tighten the bolt." "It is primitive," Vexthor declared, finding solid footing again. The intelligence briefings had been very specific on this. Humans clung to outdated methods with a cultural stubbornness that bordered on pathology. "My engineers use molecular bonding fields. Instant. Permanent. They require no physical contact and leave no mechanical stress on the joint. Your tool is obsolete." Maya tested the word the way someone tests a step before putting their full weight on it. Obsolete. She looked at Rodriguez. You hear that, Captain? We're obsolete. Added to the list, Rodriguez said from the doorway. Kim raised his hand. Right after Behind the Times, technologically regressive, and my personal favorite. Charmingly retro, Maya and Kim said together, with a synchronized ease of people who have had this particular exchange before. I genuinely do like that one, Maya agreed, and then she looked back at Vexthor, and something in her expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but his threat assessment noticed it a full second before his conscious mind did. The humor was still present, but underneath it something else had risen to the surface, something quieter, sharper, and considerably more serious, like the difference between the surface of deep water and what moves beneath it. Here's the thing about obsolete tools, Commander. She turned the wrench slowly in the cargo bay's light, studying it the way someone studies something they have relied on long enough to trust completely. They don't need power supplies. They don't need calibration matrices or firmware updates. They don't experience cascade failures when someone hits your ship with an electromagnetic pulse. She felt the weight of it settle in her palm, a small, satisfied motion, like greeting something familiar. This thing works in zero gravity, works in radiation fields, works when every electronic system on this vessel is dead, and we're tumbling toward the nearest sun on pure momentum. It works because it's simple, because it's reliable, because it is exactly what it needs to be and nothing more. Vexthor's mandible spread in dismissal, though something deep in his subroutines was filing her words in a folder it hadn't opened in a very long time. A quaint philosophy, but your attachment to primitive methodology is precisely why humanity remains classified as a Tier 3 civilization. You cling to the past when you should be reaching toward progress. The cargo bay went quiet, not the tense quiet of standoff, but the thoughtful quiet of something important waiting to be said. That's not a weapon, Maya said softly. Vexthor paused. I am aware. My scanners have confirmed this multiple. I know you know. She was looking at the wrench again with slow, deliberate attention. I'm not talking to your scanners, Commander. I'm talking to you. She looked up, and her eyes met his with a direct, unhesitating quality that his species found deeply uncomfortable, not because it was aggressive, but because it contained nothing hidden. No calculation, no performance, no strategy. Just the simple, disarming clarity of someone who means exactly what they say and says exactly what they mean. Depends who's holding it, she said. The words hung in the recycled air of Freighter 92's cargo bay like a riddle that refused to resolve itself into something manageable. Vexthor's mind did something it rarely did in the field. It remembered. 3 cycles ago, in the briefing room of the Cauldrath flagship, Admiral Core had stood before a gathered assembly of senior officers to review the latest intelligence documentation on human behavioral patterns. Vexthor had been in the 4th row, listening with the professional attention he gave everything, filing details into the methodical architecture of his military memory. Humans do not possess natural weapons, the intelligence officer had explained, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone presenting data that privately unsettled her. No venom, no natural armor, no significant bite force. Their physical strength falls within average parameters for bipedal carbon-based life. By every evolutionary metric we can apply, they should occupy a prey species niche. And yet, Admiral Core had observed. And yet, because humans have one trait that compensates for every physical limitation. They see weapons in everything. A rock becomes a hammer. A sharpened stick becomes a spear. They took fire, which every other species in our database treats as a threat to be avoided, and they use it, deliberately, repeatedly, over tens of thousands of years. They did not evolve past their physical limitations. They worked around them. Every object in their environment became potential. Every situation became an engineering problem. What does that mean practically? Another officer had asked. It means that the most dangerous thing about a human is not their technology or their weapons. It is their imagination, their refusal to accept that any situation is fixed, their absolute foundational conviction that there is always a way forward if you are creative enough to find it. Standing now in Freighter 92's cargo bay, watching Maya Torres hold a 24mm torque wrench with the quiet certainty of someone who has never once encountered a problem they believed was truly unsolvable. Vexthor finally understood what the intelligence briefings had been reaching toward but never quite managing to say. It wasn't about whether something was designed as a weapon. It was about whether a human was holding it. The philosophical clarity of that moment lasted exactly 11 more seconds. Then the entire cargo bay lurched sideways, hard enough to throw every unbraced body into the starboard bulkhead. Vexthor's armor stabilizers activated automatically, keeping him on his feet. 2 of his soldiers went down into equipment. Kim collided with a stack of crates that collapsed around him with a tremendous, clattering crash. Even Rodriguez, who had seemed a man genuinely difficult to unbalance, stumbled hard into the wall and caught himself on a support beam. Warning klaxons erupted from both ships simultaneously, the Cauldrath system's deep, resonant alarm and the human vessel's sharper, more insistent alert, creating a cacophony that filled every cubic meter of the cargo bay with urgent, competing sound. What in the frozen void was that? Vexthor demanded, his tactical display blooming suddenly with new data streams. Rodriguez was already at a wall panel, his fingers moving across the interface with the practiced speed of someone who has responded to emergencies before and has developed strong opinions about how quickly one should do so. His face, as he read the incoming data, went the particular shade of pale that Vexthor's cultural database classified as a human stress indicator. 3 ships. Unknown configuration. They dropped out of jump space directly on top of us. He looked up, and his expression communicated the rest before his words could. They are firing on both of us. Pirates, Thrax said, checking his rifle with a sharp, practice motion. Scavengers who target vessels during inspection stops. Classic ambush timing. They wait until both ships are docked and vulnerable. A second impact rolled through both vessels, and this time Vexthor heard something his experience immediately recognized as a sound of structural compromise, metal yielding, somewhere deep in the Cauldrath ship's superstructure. Not the human ship. His ship. "Your flagship is pulling away," Kim announced from his scanner, having extracted himself from the collapsed crates with impressive speed. Emergency separation protocol. Standard procedure. Vexthor said automatically, the military response forming before the full implications had time to reach him. They will regroup and return with. "You will be dead before they return," Maya said. Not harshly, just with the clean, direct clarity of someone delivering a technical assessment. Those ships are using resonance weapons. Military grade. Not pirate surplus. Not modified civilian tech. Our structural integrity drops 3% per impact. Your armor handles vacuum, but can it handle being scattered across an expanding debris field? A third impact. The lights flickered, held, then surrendered to the deep crimson of emergency systems. Every shadow in the cargo bay sharpened and deepened, giving the scene the quality of something unreal. "Captain." A woman's voice from the corridor doorway. Okonjo, her name patch read, dark-eyed and focused with a particular intensity of someone who has processed bad news and moved directly onto what to do about it. "Docking clamps are fused. The impacts welded them shut. We cannot separate from the Cauldrath vessel, which is taking considerably more damage than we are," Chen added, reading from her datapad with steady, professional calm. "Shields at 40%. Life support stable, but Section 7 is one more direct hit from venting atmosphere." Rodriguez and Vexthor looked at each other across the red-lit cargo bay. Neither of them needed to say what both of them were calculating. "We need to disable their weapon systems," Vexthor said, thinking aloud, "or damage their targeting arrays, if we can buy enough time for the flagship." "Or we improvise," Maya said. She was standing at the access panel again, the same one she'd opened to demonstrate the torque wrench. Her eyes had taken on a quality he was beginning to recognize, the particular, focused expression of a human who has just looked at a situation and seen something in it that wasn't there a moment before. Something that, to every other species, would remain invisible. "Commander." Her voice was calm, focused, stripped of everything except what mattered. "Your ship uses Cauldrath standard rotating frequency shield generators." Vexthor went very still. "That is classified military technology. How could you possibly?" "I read technical manuals when I can't sleep. Not the point." Another impact. Closer. The sound of tearing metal somewhere deep in the ship's bones. Those generators modulate their output frequency to disperse incoming energy. If we can create a feedback loop between your shield arrays and our main reactor, we can generate a pulse that overwhelms their targeting computers. It won't destroy them, but it'll blind them long enough for your flagship to get back here with everything it has. That is not possible, Vexthor said. He said it with genuine, grounded certainty, the certainty of someone who understood both systems well enough to know exactly why they could not be combined. Cauldrath military shield technology and human reactor architecture are fundamentally incompatible. Different power output ranges, different frequency spectrums, different design philosophies at every level of... The fourth impact cut him off. This one had a different quality, not just force, but a structural resonance that ran through the deck plating and up through his boots and into his bones. Something had bent that was not designed to bend. Shields at 22%. Chen's voice was steady. The number was not. Maybe 2 more hits before something critical goes, she said. Maya was already moving, the wrench in her right hand. She was pulling wall panels open with her left, exposing connections that had no business existing near each other, making calculations that had no business adding up, working with the focused speed of someone who has decided that the situation has only one direction and is committed entirely to moving in it. Larson, engineering. Root everything from non-essential systems to the main reactor. I mean everything. Life support at minimum thresholds only. She was already 3 decisions ahead of everyone else in the room, and she was moving faster. Kim, docking port. Open the Cauldrath shield emitter access panel. Petrov, every spare power coupling we have, right now. Okonjo, I need real-time structural integrity numbers because this is going to stress the hull in ways the designers never considered. She paused for exactly 1 second and looked at Vexthor. I need 2 of your soldiers and their plasma rifles. She preempted his next question before it could form. We're not shooting anyone. We're using them as improvised high-output energy cells. A beat of silence in which Vexthor processed what she had just proposed. You want to use military-grade plasma rifles as batteries, he said slowly. Improvised high-output capacitive energy sources. She was already moving toward the docking port. But yes, essentially batteries. You coming, or are you planning to become part of the debris field? Vexthor looked at Thrax. Thrax looked back at him with an expression that communicated, across all barriers of species and language and military protocol, a single clear message. These humans are absolutely out of their minds. The deck shuddered again beneath them. Outside, in the cold dark between the stars, 3 pirate vessels with military-grade weapons were systematically reducing both ships to their component parts. Insanity, Vexthor reflected, was beginning to look like their most viable remaining option. You heard the engineer. He told his troops, move. What followed was the most chaotic, improbable, and thoroughly protocol-violating 10 minutes of Vexthor's 26-year military career. Maya worked with a speed that occupied the same physical space as recklessness, but was, Vexthor gradually understood, something else entirely. It was the speed of someone who knew what they were doing so completely that hesitation had become a foreign concept. Not recklessness, but mastery at full acceleration. Her wrench never stopped moving, tightening connections that had no business holding, calibrating pressures that should have been impossible to calibrate under these conditions, persuading systems designed by different engineers on different worlds in different centuries to cooperate through a combination of precise technique and what could only be described as audacity raised to an engineering principle. Kim and 2 Cauldrath soldiers, working in a collaboration that would have seemed genuinely absurd 30 minutes ago, tore open access panels along the docking port corridor, exposing the shield generator's power conduits with a focused urgency of people who are committed to a plan and are not currently entertaining doubts about it. Larson's voice came over the comm at intervals, reporting power readings that climbed past normal operating parameters and kept climbing. The numbers were, by any standard of engineering safety, alarming. By Maya's expression as she heard them, they were approximately correct. This is never going to work, Vexthor said, watching Maya use a primitive, obsolete, utterly reliable tool to bridge a Cauldrath military power conduit to a human reactor coupling, using 2 plasma rifles as intermediary capacitors in a configuration that violated so many engineering principles he had genuinely lost count. Probably not, Maya agreed, giving the final connection 3 careful, precise turns of the wrench. The socket settled with a click that had a particular quality, the sound of something that has been asked to do something it was never designed for and has decided, against all reasonable expectation, to try anyway. She straightened up, met his eyes, put her hand flat on the activation panel. "But here's the thing about tools, Commander." Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "Sometimes you use them exactly as intended." She pressed a switch, and sometimes the energy that cascaded through the combined system didn't follow any waveform in Vexthor's tactical database. It moved through pathways that had been designed by different species for different purposes and had never, in the entire history of either civilization, been connected to each other. It created something that wasn't a weapon, wasn't a defense grid, wasn't classifiable by any existing category. It was something uniquely, impossibly human, a solution assembled from everything available, in the time available, that had no right to wake. That worked anyway. Outside, across the void between the ships, 3 pirate vessels experienced simultaneous and catastrophic failure of their targeting computers. Their sensors screamed warnings about threats that didn't exist. Their weapons locked onto coordinates occupied by nothing but starfield. Their navigation arrays, caught in the outer edge of the pulse, flickered and stuttered and went dark for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. The Cauldrath flagship dropped out of jump space directly behind a pirate formation, its weapons batteries already charged, its targeting solutions already calculated, its crew already doing what they had been trained to do. The flagship's weapons opened fire with the comprehensive efficiency of a military force presented with a problem it is very good at solving. The fight was over in 11 seconds. The pirate ships drifted, silent, their systems dark. The silence that follows battle has a quality distinct from ordinary silence. It is a silence of people who have just remembered that they are alive and are discovering that this discovery carries weight. Emergency lighting surrendered back to normal fluorescent glow. Systems ran their damage assessments with a busy, industrious efficiency of things that have been through something difficult and are carefully checking themselves for injuries. In the cargo bay of Freighter 92, people began the quiet, personal process of returning to themselves after the particular, consuming intensity of crisis. Maya sat on a cargo crate with her wrench resting across her knees and looked no more fundamentally altered by what had just happened than she had before any of it began. Her crew moved around her with the efficient purposefulness of people returning to familiar routines, checking systems, assessing damage, noting what needed fixing and in what order. They did it with a speed and matter-of-fact practicality that Vexthor observed, and noted that he was observing with genuine respect. His own soldiers stood in a loose formation near the docking port, wearing the particular expression of experienced military personnel who have survived something that violated every protocol they were trained on and are in the careful process of deciding what to do with that information. "Commander Vexthor." Admiral Cole's voice through the comm link carried the measured weight of authority assessing a situation it has not yet fully characterized. "Report." Vexthor stepped away from the humans, moving to a quieter section of the cargo bay. "The pirate threat has been neutralized, Admiral. No casualties on either side. The human vessel sustained minor structural damage but remains fully operational." A measured pause. "And the inspection?" Vexthor looked back across the cargo bay at Maya Torres, at her grease-stained coveralls, at the wrench resting on her knees, at the quiet, unshakable confidence in her posture that had not wavered once through everything that had happened, at the crew around her, moving through a ship held together by expertise and improvisation and an absolute refusal to accept that any problem would be beyond solving. The inspection revealed several significant findings. "Admiral, I will need to submit a comprehensive documentation." He chose his next word with the care of someone writing something that will matter for a long time. "What I can tell you now is that our current classification framework for human civilization requires substantial revision." The pause this time was considerably longer. "We will discuss this when you return to the flagship. Commander." The comm link closed. Vexthor stood for a moment with a quiet, settled certainty that his report was going to cause problems in ways he could not yet fully predict, and that those problems were not only necessary but overdue. Rodriguez approached with 2 cups of the dark liquid his species apparently could not function without. He offered one to Vexthor, who declined with a gesture. "You helped save our lives today, Commander. The shield modulation, that was your technical knowledge that made the whole plan actually function." "Your engineer's plan saved both our lives," Vexthor corrected. I provided equipment. She provided the understanding of how to use it in ways neither system was ever designed for. Potato, potato, Rodriguez said, and Vexthor's translator rendered this as meaningless identical repetition, but something in the captain's warm, easy tone suggested it was an idiom meaning that the distinction mattered considerably less than the outcome. Maya wandered over, wrench in hand as always, resting easy at her side like a natural extension of herself. So, Commander, still convinced we're a Tier 3 civilization? Vexthor considered the question with the genuine seriousness it deserved. The Galactic Council classification system is based on technological advancement, political stability, and cultural integration with established galactic structures. By those metrics, humanity remains Tier 3. He paused. However, Maya raised an eyebrow. I am beginning to suspect that the classification system may be measuring the wrong variables entirely. He looked at her, then at her crew, then at the improvised device whose components were already being carefully disassembled and returned to their proper places with the matter-of-fact efficiency of people who consider the extraordinary to be simply another Tuesday. Your species does not advance by perfecting what already exists. You advance by reimagining what is possible. You look at a constraint and see a problem to be solved. You look at incompatible systems and see a connection waiting to be made. You look at a tool and see potential that extends far beyond its original purpose. A silence settled over the small group. Comfortable, this time. The silence of people who have been through something together, and are on the other side of it. That might be the kindest thing a Cauldrath officer has ever said about us, Maya observed. Do not misunderstand me, Vexthor said carefully. Your safety protocols are genuinely appalling. That connection you made should have failed with a probability exceeding 92%. You are chaotic, stubbornly attached to outdated methods, and your organizational systems cause me considerable professional distress. And yet, Kim called from across the bay, where he had apparently been listening. And yet, Vexthor agreed quietly. You are here, and so are we, and the probability of that outcome, given what we were working with, was far lower than 12%. So what are you going to tell your superiors? Maya asked. The truth. All of it. He didn't hesitate. The improvised defense. The systematic violation of engineering principles. The way you approach an impossible situation as a problem to be solved rather than a limitation to be accepted. The way your species looks at the universe and sees, in everything, what it could become. He paused. I will recommend that the Council develop a new classification framework. Not an advancement. Humanity is still many cycles from political and technological thresholds that would require. But a new category. Something that accounts for what you actually are. Tier 3.5, Rodriguez suggested. Tier unpredictable, Maya countered. Tier, hold my beverage and observe what happens next. Larson called from across the bay, to a wave of laughter that Vexthor's translator categorized as an error and, for once, wisely declined to process. As his soldiers prepared to return to the flagship, as damage reports were filed and repair schedules established, and the complicated paperwork of an inspection that had become something considerably more significant than an inspection was begun, Vexthor found himself doing something that violated protocol in a way he felt, with growing certainty, was entirely right. He approached Maya one final time. Engineer Torres, he said formally, I would like to request something. The surprise on her face was genuine, unguarded, unperformed. Then, gradually, something warm arose to replace it. Not the sharp grin of challenge, not the quick humor of someone winning an argument, but something quieter and more real. The expression of someone who has been, after everything, actually understood. You want a souvenir? She asked. I want a teaching aid, Vexthor said. For the next time someone under my command forgets that the most dangerous thing in this galaxy is not superior technology or overwhelming firepower, or even the will to use them. It is an intelligent being who refuses, completely, foundationally, without exception, to accept that something cannot be done. Maya was quiet for a moment. She looked at the wrench in her hand with the expression of someone saying a small, private goodbye to something that has served them well through things worth remembering. Then she reached into her tool belt and produced a smaller wrench, 15mm, worn smooth at the grip from years of work, from all the places it had been and all the things it had fixed. This one's seen me through some things, she said, holding it for a moment before extending it toward him. Rebuilt 3 separate engines with it. Fixed a life support system during a meteor shower with 6 hours of breathable atmosphere left. Once opened a particularly stubborn jar of pickles at 2 in the morning. A pause. The first 2 feel more heroic in retrospect, but I'll tell you honestly, that third one might have been equally important at the time. Vexthor took the wrench carefully and was unprepared for its weight. Not heavy, but present, with a satisfying, grounded density of something that has been where it has been and done what it has done. It was just metal. Simple, primitive, by any galactic standard obsolete. But in his manipulators, it felt like holding something that had earned its existence many times over. Something that understood, in whatever way an object can understand, exactly what it was and what it was for. "Take care of it, Commander," Maya said. "I will." He turned it once in his grip, feeling the worn places where her hands had smoothed the metal over years of use. Then he looked up at her. "And remember, it's not a weapon," Maya said softly. "Unless it needs to be," Vexthor finished. For a moment, in the red-worn cargo bay of Freighter 92, Commander Vexthor of the Cauldrath Imperial Fleet and Engineer Maya Torres of a battered cargo hauler with an uninspired name looked at each other across the considerable distance of their respective species, histories, and classifications, and understood each other completely. "Now you're getting it," she said. As Vexthor's shuttle pulled away from Freighter 92, as the battered cargo ship turned its nose toward its original destination and accelerated into the deep dark between stars, he held a 15-millimeter wrench and looked out through the viewport at the retreating vessel until it became a point of light and then became nothing. He would write his report honestly. All of it. Every detail of the boarding, the standoff, the pirates, the improvised defense that should not have worked and did. He would recommend new protocol for human contact situations, new language for the classification framework, new training module for officers who might encounter human crews. He would attach a photograph of the wrench with a single line of accompanying text. Human tool. Multiple applications. Threat assessment. Depends who's holding it. Some of his superiors would read the report and understand it immediately. Others would file it under anomalous field data and move on. Bureaucracies, even ones that span star systems and govern the interactions of hundreds of civilizations, move at the speed of institutions, which is to say slowly, and with a deep structural resistance to new categories that the universe finds, on balance, somewhat frustrating. But every officer who read it would see the photograph, and somewhere in their understanding of the galaxy, a small, important door would open. Vexthor set the wrench on the seat beside him for the journey back to the flagship. It sat there with the quiet, uncomplicated presence of something that knew exactly what it was and had nothing to prove about it. He had boarded 473 vessels in his career. Only one of them had changed the way he looked at the galaxy. Not about weapons, though the lesson had worn that disguise convincingly at first. Not about danger, though danger had been genuinely, lethally present. But about something older and stranger and more important than either of those things, about imagination. The specific, irreplaceable, thoroughly dangerous kind of imagination that looks at a rock and sees a hammer, that looks at an impossible situation and sees a solution waiting to be assembled from whatever happens to be within reach, that looks at a simple metal tool and sees, without hesitation, everything it could become in the right hands. Somewhere on Freighter 92, Maya Torres was probably already tightening a bolt, fixing something, preparing, with the calm certainty of someone who has always found a way through everything the universe has sent her for whatever came next. She had her tools. She had her crew. She had the absolute, unshakable conviction that there was always a way forward if you were willing to look at the problem long enough and creatively enough and refuse, firmly, cheerfully, without exception, to accept that it was beyond you. Vexthor found that thought both deeply unsettling and, in a way he had not expected and could not quite explain, genuinely comforting. The galaxy had very little idea what it was dealing with, but it was beginning to find out. Commander Vexthor of the Cauldrath Imperial Fleet had boarded exactly 473 vessels in the long, disciplined arc of his military career. He had boarded Vexian smuggling barges reeking of chemical contraband. He had stepped onto Malvarian warships still warm from battle. He had walked through the cold, sterile corridors of Threndil science vessels where the very air tasted of something clinical and unsettling. In all 473 of those boardings, not once had a ship smelled quite like this. Freighter 92, a name so uninspired it might as well have been a filing reference, hit him the moment the airlock cycled open. Something burnt, something sweet, something else entirely. A third scent he couldn't classify that made his secondary nostrils close involuntarily, as though his own biology were registering a quiet protest on behalf of his dignity. His tactical visor blinked green, then yellow, then settled into a thoroughly confused amber as it attempted, and largely failed, to catalog the various substances floating in the recycled air. Scan complete, Commander. The voice of his second officer, Thrax, crackled through the comm link with crisp military precision. No weapons detected. Repeat, no weapons detected. Vexthor's mandibles clicked in sharp irritation. That couldn't be right. The intelligence briefings had been unambiguous on this point. Humans loved weapons. They collected weapons with the devotion of religious observance. They named their weapons, engraved them with the names of fallen enemies, wrote songs about them, and passed them down through generations as though blades and rifles were the most meaningful things a person could leave behind. The idea that a human vessel would contain absolutely zero weapons was, statistically speaking, almost offensive. "Run it again," he ordered, his translator rendering his words into the flat, oddly breathy sounds of human language. The cargo bay of Freighter 92 was a testament to creative disorder raised to the level of philosophy. Crates were stacked in configurations that violated at least 7 Cauldrath safety protocols, possibly more, if one counted the philosophical violations. Cables hung from the ceiling in loose, organic clusters that resembled the innards of some enormous mechanical creature that had given up on containing itself. Tools had been left on surfaces with a casual disregard for organization that made something deep in Vexthor's methodical mind quietly flinch. And yet, despite all this cheerful, defiant chaos, the ship hummed, the systems ran, the air recycled, the light stayed on. Standing in the center of it all, 12 armed Cauldrath soldiers arranged in a tight, disciplined formation around her, was a single human female. She was average height for her species, approximately 1.6 meters, with dark hair pulled back in what his cultural database identified as a ponytail. Her coveralls bore the honest stains of real labor, grease along both forearms, a dark oil smear on one knee, and what appeared to be some variety of amber food product near the collar. She held a cylindrical metal object loosely in her right hand, letting it dangle at her side with the utter carelessness of someone who had forgotten it was there at all. She looked at the 12 plasma rifles pointed in her general direction, the way most people look at mild traffic congestion, with mild awareness and zero concern. "You going to stand there all day?" she said, her voice carrying the pleasant ease of someone with better things to do. "Or are we doing this?" Her lips pulled up at one corner. Not quite a smile, not quite a smirk, but something that lived in the ambiguous, dangerous territory between amusement and challenge. Vexthor's translator processed a casual disrespect and promptly filed it under 3 separate headings simultaneously. In Cauldrath culture, addressing a commander without proper honorifics was ground for immediate detention, a formal reprimand, and a great deal of deeply uncomfortable paperwork. He made a mental note to discuss this with a human crew at the earliest appropriate opportunity, assuming such an opportunity presented itself. "I am Commander Vexthor of the Cauldrath Imperial Fleet," he began, following first contact protocols out of old habit even though this was technically a hostile boarding action. "This vessel has been flagged for inspection under Galactic Trade Regulation 7.4. You will." Yeah. The human waved her free hand with the dismissive grace of someone shooing away a mildly irritating insect. "Paperwork's in the captain's office. 3rd door on the left. Help yourself." The metal cylinder in her right hand caught the overhead lighting and gleamed dully, not the sharp gleam of polished weaponry, but the worn, honest shine of something used often and cared for well. Vexthor's primary eyes fixed on it with professional attention, while his secondary eyes tracked her body language with the careful, trained awareness his years of service had built into him. Humans were renowned throughout the Galactic Council for the extraordinary complexity of their nonverbal communication. A human could tell you with complete sincerity that everything was fine while every other part of their body communicated something entirely different. This human seemed, as far as he could determine, genuinely fine, which was itself somehow alarming. "Identify yourself," he commanded, stepping forward. His armor servos whirred softly with each movement. Maya Torres, she replied, shifting her weight to one hip with easy practice comfort. Engineer, technician, and apparently today's welcoming committee, since everyone else is on their break. A beat. Sorry about the smell. By the way, we had a coolant incident. What is that in your hand? Maya glanced down at the cylindrical object, as though genuinely surprised to find it still there. She turned it over once, examining it the way a person might examine a pen they've been unconsciously clicking for the last 20 minutes. This? Oh, don't worry about this. Vexthor's mandibles spread wide, his species equivalent of a slow, deliberate frown. I will determine what requires worry. What is that object? It's not a weapon, Maya said pleasantly, if that's what you're asking. His tactical scan agreed with her immediately, running 3 separate confirmations in quick succession. No energy signatures, no explosive compounds, no projectile mechanisms, no biological hazards. Just metal. Primitive, simple, inert. His threat assessment downgraded from orange to yellow with a small, self-satisfied time. Then you will not object to placing it on the ground. Oh, I object, Maya said. Strongly, in fact. You object? Yep. To placing an inert object on the ground. Because I'm working, Commander. Her eyes, which his database classified as brown, though they seemed to contain small flecks of gold in the cargo bay's uneven lighting, held his gaze without flinching, without aggression, without any of the qualities his training associated with confrontation. Just steady, comfortable directness. And a woman's got to have her tools.